I think sports in general is something that people need. I think really truly need in their life to some capacity, at least from my perspective, just strictly in terms of the team camaraderie,
Hmm.
adversity, hard work, and just being around friends. With managing people, you have to, how do you get the most out of that person, not the most out of what you want? They
That's
both,
a
if
great
you get
line.
right, and I think that's kind of the way I always saw it. Because again, if you can get that person to, what their at least 100% can be and their potential can be, it will align to get to where the company needs to go. But if you look at the other way around, you're telling a fish to climb a tree, like it's not going to work. You have to let go of some things in order to evaluate others.
And we're recording. Wade Kuiken-Rogers, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, pleasure having you on and pleasure being part of, I guess you could sort of say, that initial announcement of Avvivi. So take us through what Avvivi is, because this is something relatively new to the market. I mean, a lot of people might be aware with it, but I'm sure there's pockets of people that are want to know what it's all about. But Avvivi, you're the managing director. So take us through what it is and what your role as managing director entails.
For sure, for sure. So what Avvivi is we're coined it as a marketing or a video intelligence company. And to put simply, what we're doing is we're helping brands and agencies navigate the market and the fragmentation within it, and just help them buy video better. There is a massive gap between the delivery that you're on and the actual impact that it does have. And so what we're done is helping people bridge that gap by helping them plan, activate, and measure their entire video advertising budget within one connected ecosystem. So we've onboarded the best of connected TV, uh, digital out of home, YouTube, and online videos into one connected ecosystem so that you get one view into the entire market. And what I've been doing as managing director within this is, well, really, because we are essentially a bit of a startup, a bit of numerous different hats, but the main goal is making sure that we're driving that focus to that kind of that total video, that one connected ecosystem. But on the back end, helping connect all the different tech, help with the different sales strategy, doing some of the meetings, really kind of connecting all the different pieces together. That really requires when you're starting a new business, especially trying to carve out a new distinction within this market.
Look, I can appreciate the patience that comes with wearing all of those different hats, but we're going to come back to that in a bit. As always, we go to the beginning. So let's start first with where you're from.
Perfect. So I was born in Burlington, Ontario. Fun fact, in the same hospital as Jim Carrey and Ryan Gosling. So you could almost say I'm like the third most biggest
There we
celebrity
go.
to come out of the hospital behind the Gos and Jim Carrey. But really, where I would say where I grew up was a little town called Rockwood, Ontario. Not many people have heard of it. It's just outside of Guelph, and to put in perspective, when I moved there, it was 900 people. No Tim Hortons,
Th-
no,
th- That's unique
no,
for any
no.
Canadian town.
Well, I mean, that's exactly it. That's the flagship you should have, but yeah, none of that, and really just like a small kind of farming town just outside of Guelph. That's kind of where I grew up. Grew up with a bunch of great friends around there that we've known each other since we're like 3 years old. Still friends to this day, but just a really small community that kind of helped shape the way I am today.
Take us through that a little bit more. How did living in a small town of, say, like 900 people shape you to who you are today?
Well, it's perfect. So you have to make your own fun, right? So there
Okay,
is,
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, tying that back to what you're doing right now, where
yeah,
you
yeah.
have to get shit done.
I mean, that's exactly it, right? There
Mm.
is there was nothing really going on, no stores, no shops or anything to go to. So every day was a new adventure. We had to go out and kind of carve our own fun and yeah, it was great. So again, like I was saying, I was blessed to kind of have these couple friends I grew up with in this small town, and we would, every day in the summer we get together, and if we weren't playing road hockey, we're trying to figure out, some trouble or something to get into. And as the summers go on, you come up with really inventive ideas, Victor. So
Mm.
we grew up behind a farm. We played these things called corn wars. Corn
Wait,
wars.
Corn Wars. Yeah, no, okay.
So what
Where are
this
we going
was
with
is
this?
yeah. So you sneak into the farmer's cornfield and you kind of make your own little bases, and then everyone just runs at each other and throws corn. And that's if you get hit with the corn cob, you're out. So
That's
little
awesome.
little inventive games like that, or GT snow racing, cliff jumping, anything along those lines that was just kind of fun, right? Because we didn't really have much growing up. We grew up in very humble beginnings, and it wasn't a town that when you're younger, you have access to vehicle, you have access to get out, so you're just with your buddies every single day, and it really helps to formulate who you are as a person, and something I definitely take pride in. Yeah, and I mean a fun fact about Rockwood, which people are gonna laugh when I say this, but we made it on the mark when Cheaper by the Dozen too.
Oh,
With Carmel
the
Electra, Steve Martin, yeah, they came
yep.
to Rockwood. It was a big moment, Victor. It was a big moment.
Did the whole town shut down for that?
The whole town shut down. Everyone's trying to get a peek.
Look, I can relate to that a little bit. Do you remember the show Kung Fu: The Legend Continues?
I do.
Yes, they used to film that in my old neighborhood in Mississauga,
Okay.
and everyone used to shut down for that, even though none of the kids knew who David Carradine was. It's just the thought of them rolling in there and
Yeah,
filming a
yeah.
show and maybe seeing it on TV.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, I recognize that spot. I recognize this. So yeah, that was a big milestone for us. It was great.
It's kind of funny you bring up Corn Wars. If you were to talk to a young person today and say, "Have you ever played Corn Wars?" They'd probably think you were talking about a game, like, on
A
their
game.
phone.
So 100%. I
You
think
should
this is
turn that
where
into an app right there. Actually, there's your idea.
yeah.
There's the real retirement moneymaker right there, Corn Wars.
Well, it's yeah, but then you're further tied into the further kind of separation from the idea of creating up and coming up with those games, right? So
Mhm.
but again, it's those fun little things that you come up with that. To be honest, like I even tell my buddies who grew up in Toronto in different areas, you're like, you did what as a kid? That you you sneak into the farmer's field and ride their horses, and
Oh,
it's just
okay. That would
yeah.
get more attention than playing with corn.
Yeah, yeah, correct. So, or we again because we grew up in a massive forest, so like you steal your parents' kind of hammers and saws and go back there and make your own little forts and all
Mhm.
the different things that you kept busy with. But again, it's those kind of fun, innovative, weird things that in a town where you normally should just be bored, you make your own fun, and it was some of the best fun you've ever had.
Going into sports a little bit more,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
ask all my guests what their hobbies were growing up, and you started off by saying when we were doing pre-production work, hockey, hockey, hockey. So how big was hockey to you growing up?
Embarrassingly, it was everything. Right?
Don't
So
be
like,
embarrassed about that. That's the typical
yeah.
Canadian thing. Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of it, right? Like of all my buddies, that's all we wanted to be. Every single one of us, right? And you're playing, game seven overtime in your driveway every single day
Mhm.
to play road hockey with your buddies every day. And I fortunately wasn't as talented to go as far as some of my buddies, but it was everything. And then if you look at yearbooks and stuff, like what do you want to be when you grow up? I remember just like playing the NHL, playing the NHL, playing the NHL, and that was that was it. And I think what I love about that as well is that at a young age, even to get back to it is, yeah, I think sports in general is something that people need. I think really truly need in their life to some capacity, at least from my perspective, just strictly in terms of the team camaraderie,
Mhm.
adversity, hard work, and just being around friends. Right. I think if you bring those together and the aspects that came from hockey really I think have translated into who I am today in terms of that having that grit and determination, and having that kind of competitive edge. And since we were 5 years old playing road hockey, we probably played 1,000 different games against each other, and not one of them ever. They've always been competitive. You've always wanted to win, right? So
And can I add something to that? It also
please.
teaches you how to win and lose because people have
Well,
gotta learn
that's
how to
yes,
lose.
correct. I think that's the other side too, is it teaches you, yeah, it teaches you that heartbreak, right? It teaches you how that,
Mm.
how you lose, how you come together as a team. And I think also the biggest thing that I take from it as well, and what I've noticed at least, some people that might have not played sports is also, I think lose, but taking feedback, right?
Mhm.
And if you have a good coach, maybe like, hey, having, good feedback in terms of, you did this wrong. This is how you should be doing it next time, or so on and so forth. Maybe not always that nice all the time, but it is taking that feedback, learning it, adjusting it, and then applying it. I think is a massive thing. Like, did you play sports growing up, Victor?
I did play sports growing up, and it's funny because a lot of the sports that I played, I'm in sales and I've been in sales most of my career.
Yeah,
It's kind of relatable to what a sales professional goes through where you're competing against your peers, but you're also trying to help them. Like
completely.
I did martial arts, I did a little bit of motorsports, and
Ooh,
then I also did swimming. And in all of
okay.
those, you have to compete against your peers. What position did you play in hockey?
Center, because it's
Center.
want to be the
Okay.
center of attention too.
Interesting. I've had a couple of goalies on,
Yeah,
and it was really interesting to hear. They were like, we had to put the connection together that they were probably the most ruthless out of all the hockey players. And kind of like kind of where we went with it was, is that if you're the second best defenseman on your team, you might not make the starting lineup, but you're definitely going to play the game. If you're the second best goalie, you could be spending most of the season on the bench.
on the bench.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
we were
And what
going
I
through
think
that.
with goalies too, right? It's like, I mean, they're always the quirky person in the locker room, but I think you almost have to be, right? Because it's like, if you're a goalie, you don't always get the glory. You're just trying to do a little better each time. If you only let in two
Mhm.
goals, you're not score. You know what I mean? Where it's like a player is, you can be on for a goal, you're off the ice, and you can forget about it. But yeah,
Well, I mean, look at the US team and the gold medal, men's US team in the gold medal game. I mean, not much of a hockey guy, like, I don't understand it on your level, but from what I'd read was and what I'd seen that Canada actually pummeled their defense and just
yeah,
couldn't put it over the line, yet the USA is gonna remember the guy who scored the game-winning goal.
yeah. But
They're
I
not
mean,
gonna
that's
remember the
exactly it.
defense that carried them all the way to overtime.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, right? That's exactly it.
Okay, so sticking with sports, I ask all my guests who they looked up to growing up. You gave me 3 interesting ones. We'll start with this, before we get to your family. You've got Joe Sakic, Joe Carter, and Vince Carter. We got 2 Joes and 2 Carters. So why those 3 why those 3 guys?
Because I think it's for me, it was again like just being such a sports guy growing up. You're always watching them on TV, and if you think about those three just in terms of the first time, like, really falling in love with each of those different sports, right? Obviously, Joe Carter kind of goes without saying that's in our
Mm.
blood since then, and it's like,
He's a
albeit they're
hero,
quite
yeah.
young, right? And it's like that's in there, and it's like you're always talking about it, and you kind of want that feeling back again. Um, Vince Carter putting basketball on the mat, right, with the dunk competition. I remember that coming to Rockwood, and then all of a sudden, like literally in Rockwood, the small country bumpkin town, everyone all of a sudden had basketball nets, like within like a year, and wanted to do all
Mm.
these like crazy dunks, and it just like it really reverberated through. And then Joe Sakic was kind of that first, I don't know, that kind of first great, like for us, one of those first, or at least for me, one of those first great players you associated with, right? I was, too young to really kind of follow with kind of Wayne Gretzky, but obviously that goes without saying. But you see, like Joe Sakic was this like larger than life, and just those cup runs with Colorado and stuff. Where you were just like, being a diehard Leaf fan. It was just like a guy that you consistently watch. And then, to be honest, for us, it was like that was grew up in a small town. It felt like sports was until we got the education, which we'll get into a little bit. You felt like that was like your only exit, right? It was like how to kind of
Mm.
get out. It was, and we were playing it every day, and everyone wanted to be it because that, until you got a bit older, that was, hey, how are we going to get out of this town, out of this small town? That's kind of what it felt like, right?
And your parents.
Yeah. So I think that is, when I look back, albeit, the biggest influence is probably my parents, right? We grew up very lower middle class in that sense. And so, it was always hard work and determination. Dad working, the midnight shifts at the factory, mom kind of working during the day. He's picking up a second job as a part-time firefighter, just to put food on the table. And I think the biggest thing is that, they weren't always around, but they were always impactful in terms of we always have to work hard. You don't finish, you're not done until the job's done. And there's just so many of these like little tiny things that, I think as a kid, you're probably a bit pissed off about it. Like, what, like, like I'm doing all this work and all those different things, but it was that tenacity and I think hard work that's always kind of stuck with me in terms of not, not efficient, time's done, everyone's kind of on that same team and really, making sure that, that you're providing. And that's something that they've always instilled in me. And, I see that now and even just little decisions that I'm making and wanting to work hard and do that, I can't really thank them enough. And I think it's something that, we grew up like again with little means, but we always had food on the table. We always were able to play hockey. We were always able to do things like that. So it was something that you always kind of look back and reflect on that, I wouldn't be, in Toronto today and launching a new company if we didn't kind of have those kind of humble beginnings.
And going back to your dad, uh, taking a second job, would you say he was a bit of a hustler? Because going into your very
Oh yeah.
first foray into working, you were hustling. I mean, you weren't working a standard job with a regular paycheck. You were babysitting and cutting grass.
That's true. So I mean that's yeah, so he was a hard worker and a hustler. And I think that's always kind of stuck with me and exactly what you were saying before I got that kind of first job. That was, yeah, walking around the block with a lawnmower and just seeing $10 to cut the grass. I think people listening to this will probably think shocking that, I was responsible for babysitting, but put some cash on the table. But yeah, I mean that was kind of the first. I think, that kind of got into me into more that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, if you will, of like, there's different ways to make money outside of just kind of the standard norm.
So, what made you then go in and become a grocery store clerk?
My parents said, the lawn, I guess in the wintertime, you're not cutting
Yeah,
too
okay,
many
you know what?
lawns,
You've got a good point. I mean, you could have
right?
been hustling
So,
with a shovel or a snowblower.
well, yeah, but the only thing is shoveling, you're only getting $5 a driveway, right? So it was a
Mm,
bit of a different economics. So I think it was more consistency, and then also, you know, you first foray into an actual kind of paycheck job, and you're basically just picking up the different carts and packaging groceries at what's now called Metro, but then I think it's called AMP. But
I remember
um,
MP.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Making your 6.25 or 7.15 an hour. I think, working 4 hour shifts at a time after tax, getting your $18 paycheck and
Yep.
which is insane to say now.
Oh god, yeah. That barely
you know?
gets you a meal at McDonald's.
Yeah,
That's
like
be you'd
barely.
be literally be trading 4 hours of labor for lunch.
Like literally lunch. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what did you learn about yourself when you were doing that part-time job? Because a lot of people, upon reflection, will look back at that and go, consciously or subconsciously, this led me down a different path because maybe I didn't like, maybe I didn't like working retail, or maybe I liked the aspect of working with people when I was in retail. Did you have a light bulb moment there, or was it just a paycheck?
I think it was, yeah, I think it's your classic, like, I don't want to, it was just a paycheck in the sense, like, I know I don't want to be doing this
Which is,
going
you know
forward,
what? That's fair too. I did fast
right?
food for a bit, and I was just like, I'm learning firsthand that I don't want to do this.
But but it also showed it's like, if you wanted, that's how I guess beer money, right?
Yeah,
Like, and it's like you want that. It just showcased. Well, I think it was great to showcase like how much you have to work in order to purchase X or purchase Y, and then
mm,
and also kind of gives you. And again, what I liked about you kind of learned about that standard paycheck is, well, how far can this go, right? And like, how much more do I need to work in order to go away for the weekend or get a case of beer or do something like along
yeah.
those lines, right? Where it's, I think that was super important. But yeah, to be honest, I think it was more just like a paycheck that was flexible around hockey and school for sure.
So you've spoken a couple times about getting out of Rockwood, and I guess this was your ticket out of Rockwood. You were like, what we say, this close to going to the University of Guelph, which was one town over, and then you got the opportunity to go to Dalhousie out in Halifax. So
Yeah,
we're skipping 2 time zone. I know, why 1 time zone over and like a 2-hour flight. So how did, because it sounds like this was an 11th hour thing. Like, so where did the opportunity or the interest to go to Dalhousie come from? And why did you study business?
yeah. So I mean, with that, right? I think this is, and I think from here on, kind of going forward through these different stories, it's I think you start to figure out because you don't really realize the different opportunities that you have. I think now, kids are a bit luckier just in terms of, the options and the education into finding out where you can go. Back then it was you get three choices in Ontario for university. And I
Mhm.
thought that was my only option, right? I thought I can only really go to Ontario. Like, yeah, there's you can go to the US, you can go to this, but like I thought, okay, well, Ontario probably has the best universities. You got three applications, and I did apply to like Western, Ottawa, and Guelph, and got into Ottawa and Guelph. Didn't get the Western, but so I'm like, okay, well, I'll go to Guelph for business. Picked up my classes, and I think I chose business just in general. Is that again, I thought that was really based on my grades, based on, I did accounting and was good at math in school. Um, that was the best option for a career after, right? It's like no one really knows what they wanted to do, but I figured if I stick in business, it gives me enough variability that I could probably land a good career after because I'm good at math and I understand somewhat business in that sense. And so I was going to Guelph, like classes picked, everything. And literally at the 11th hour, so my mom's from small town Nova Scotia, and she mentioned, well, there's this university called Dalhousie out there, which again, never heard of really until I applied. I applied late, so it was full. So I had full plans to go to the University of Guelph, which again, in hindsight, would have been terrible because I would have lived at home with my parents, would have, gone to the same area, same things, would have learned more about myself. But then I got into Dal, I think mid-July, and you go to school in September.
That is
I'm
late,
like,
yeah. We're 6
really
weeks
late.
out from the start.
Yeah, and I was like, you know what? Honestly, I just, for lack of a better term, screw it. Like, let's try it out. I didn't know a single person. A lot of my buddies stayed back an extra year to play hockey, football, what have you. And I was like, I kind of I want a different aspect, right? I want something different. I want to try out something new, get out of your comfort zone. And to be honest, one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Okay, so let's go back to something you said there. This was your first time leaving Rockwood. You're leaving all of your friends behind, and you're going to a new province, new school, and you don't know anyone.
Yeah,
Was that a bit of an adventure for you? Like, how did you find any positivity in that? Like, did you know going into it, going, I've got to learn how to make friends. I've got to make new friends. It's the only way I'm going to get something out of this. Because I noticed this too when I went to university and I left Mississauga, is that you had some people that were so tied to their hometown that they just couldn't function properly and they were just
yeah.
itching to get out. And they left usually by the end of the year, if not halfway through the year.
Yeah. So I mean, I think you either thrive or
Mm,
don't, right? And I think it's so when I went out, I mean, obviously I was nervous, but I was like, the prospect was cool. I wanted to go out there. So me, my mom, my grandma drove out there. I'm still a bit nervous. I'm thinking like, okay, well, this is kind of cool. And I remember like when they left and dropped me in my dorm room, and not if you remember dorm rooms, but until you make it your own, it almost looks like a prison cell, right?
it
It's just
does. Yeah.
four stark walls, two single beds, and two desks. And I'm like, they left. I'm like, what have I done? And no one's like, and a lot of my buddies now, but then they kind of everyone kind of had their own like friends they went out with. I went by myself,
Mm,
right? So yeah,
I can
you
relate
had
to that.
to.
Yep.
Yeah, right, and so you had to make friends, right? You had to kinda go out of your comfort zone, try out different things, try out different sports, whatever it might be, and make pals, and I think luckily, the floor I was on there was almost every single person now, it's like some of my best buddies to this day, but again, you have to kinda go out of your comfort zone to find that, right? And I think it was a bit challenging at the start, but I think you really discover actually, who you are, and I don't think you can really grow until you actually step out of your comfort zone. And I think that was the first kind of foray for the first time my entire life that I've actually properly had to do that.
So, what brought you back? And want to preface that by saying I went to a smaller university or and outside of Toronto as well too. And something that I've learned, and even saw this from my friends as well too, is that they don't like that brain drain, that temporary brain drain where like people come in, they'll learn, and then they'll want to leave. Now, Halifax is a capital city; it's not a small town whatsoever. But did they ever try to talk you into it? I'm talking about like local businesses, the local chamber of commerce, even the university, trying to keep the students in Nova Scotia so they take everything they've learned and they built upon it there, and it helps fund the economy and so forth. Or was the goal always to come back to Ontario?
Yeah, I think the goal was to always come back. But if we were out there, I was thinking, well, maybe I'll come stay out here for like a year or two, and I made some friends. But
Hmm.
I mean, the challenging part with Halifax is that, once it was great, but once all your buddies left, there is because no one that really went to Dow was from Halifax. I'd say vast majority are from here, right?
I've
And
actually heard that. So yeah, that's interesting.
the vast, like I would, you obviously met a couple Nova Scotians and a couple of my buddies stayed there, but a vast majority of people that I went to school with were from like Toronto or Vancouver, right? So for me, it's like you definitely think about it, but especially then, I know actually Halifax is booming right now with some tech, some ad tech and advertising, but back then, not really. Very blue collar, a lot of fishery, all that kind of stuff. But the challenge with Halifax, right, is that once you leave, there's really no hate on New Brunswick, but there's really nothing until you almost hit Montreal, right?
Mm.
So you're pretty isolated. I think the opportunities for what I thought I wanted to do at the time in terms of finance and accounting were extremely limited there. And I thought my only chance was really to come back here and try a shot at the big city.
So we're talking mainly public sector jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you come back and your first job, you half joke and say that, yeah, you broke into finance, but you're working as a bank teller at TD.
Well, and I think that is, and for a lot of people like listening as well, and that was, I thought I was, hot shit kind of coming out. I got great grades, majoring in accounting, at a decent university. The world's gonna be my oyster. I'm gonna get jobs like this. Come back, I'm applying. I'm literally actually before that, I'm unloading trucks at a logistics company. I'm like, this is what this education got me, and then yeah, and then I finally got into finance but working 25 hours at TD Bank. So the very
Mm.
front line of finance, if you will. But honestly, it was a really interesting, you always try to take from it because actually what a lot of people maybe don't realize is that as a teller, you have to be a sales rep. So there's sales goals that you have to hit. They're not, but like everything you're not just the service, you actually have the sales. So there is part of that kind of on the fly kind of thinking and sales mentality that you kind of got to pick up. So there was some aspects to it, but it was I think rude awakening that universities as one step, and then the next is now you are back to a small fish in a very 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 big pond.
See, this is the problem I have with university is that you go through these business classes and they're teaching you how to be the leader of tomorrow. But your first job, I mean, unless you start a company, usually isn't a leadership role. So you
Yeah.
kind of have to go backwards and people get a little anxious or they get a little frustrated because they want to take everything they've learned, but they're not getting the opportunities to apply what they've learned. But then it's kind of like what you said as well, too. There's a bit of a cold shower because there's stuff that you haven't learned as well. And going back to your major in accounting, did you go through the whole because at that point, I don't think it was CPA yet. It was like you could either
I
be
think
what CA, CMA, and CGA as
CPA.
well. Yeah.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
wife's a CPA, so I kind of went through it with her like from afar.
So your
But
taxes are tight. Your taxes are tight.
the
They're taken care
taxes, she can do calculus in her sleep. She's absolutely
of.
brilliant. But did you ever look at that as the next step? Because I know sometimes that can be off-putting for people where they get an accounting degree or they majored in accounting and then they find out they've got to do another 3 or 4 years of schooling.
Well, and that was it, right? It was like I got into it because I was good at it, and I started to realize I got good marks, but I didn't enjoy it. Right. And what I liked about accounting is, the numbers factor to it, the logic you have to kind of put into kind of like solving for different problems. Like I love that aspect of it. But yeah, the thought of, going, doing hours, do the testing, I was like, I don't know if I like it that much. So actually I went a bit of a different route because again, at that time you're scrambling. Okay, well, the degree isn't enough to even start and now I have to do other testing because now that's the next bar. Right. So okay, so I had a lot of my buddies were writing the CFA.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
and so I was like, again, one of those things like, oh yeah, sure, like I'll do it. And to anyone listening who's ever done it or thinking about doing it, that's not something that I think you kind of willy nilly just like, yeah, I'll do it. Because all of a sudden, I think 8 textbooks show up on your desk.
Oh God, yeah.
And and I kind of was, well, I could do this in like 2 months. And you can't. And basically you go in and you write this test, and it's like, I remember it because I thought this is what I wanted to do. And I remember like the moment I realized maybe it wasn't for me was it's a 6 hour long exam. It's like 2 3 hour parts. And you walk into this room as far as you can see are just desks. Like honest thousands of people, I felt like. And so, I'm averagely smart and was writing stuff pretty quick. And I remember coming out and like, yeah, head down, put the test. And I look up and there's only one other person outside. And I was like, oh God, I made a great mistake. Like I'm not that smart. But again, it's you go through it, right? And then I did some interviews for investment banks. Like I interviewed at like Barclays Capital, interviewed at TD, like on the investment banking side. And again, that is the one thing. Those jobs you can't BS your way. Like you got to be passionate. You got to be running because those are long hours, long lot of dedication. And that was kind of where I was kind of bouncing around and still, again, leaving that, you're thinking, hey, well, this isn't for me. I'm like, now what? Right?
So when you were working at TD as a teller, was
Yeah.
that just a job you took, or was there an eye on growing within the company and getting out of the branch?
Uh, I think, yeah, I think it was, hey, I think a mix of both. I was like, maybe if I work, because then I said, okay, well, maybe if I work here long enough, I can move up maybe within the branch. And then now I'm within the system. I can then get a better shot at a corporate role because I had been here for 2 or 3 years. All right. And then, now you're applying within their internal system, not on
Mm.
like LinkedIn. So yeah, that was a bit of like the logic and thought process behind that for sure.
So
Didn't
when
work out, but
No, but it brought you to this spot. So
yeah.
let's when did you know that you were done with finance, and when did you move into ad tech, and how did that opportunity present itself?
Like honestly, like finger in the air. I I got in at a time, so I was working for as an accounts receivable at a logistics company. Let me tell you, that is the most exhilarating job. You're just, I can tell you, it is just matching invoices. And I was like, again, just a job. And I'm honestly, I think I was applying to, I had felt like 100 jobs a day and just submit, 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 a lot in finance. And honestly, I guess one of them I submitted to, and I don't even remember hitting it, was this company called the Exchange Lab. Don't even remember applying to it. I think I just saw it. I actually probably thought it was a finance
I
company.
was gonna say it does have more of a financial name, like a financially themed name, so
Yeah. Well,
probably
if
thought
you
you were trading
honestly,
stocks.
yeah, like honestly, that's like, but I honestly don't even remember replying to it. And so I, again, was just throwing enough things at the wall, hoping something would stick. And so I get this email back. It's like, hey, thanks for applying. I'm like, you're welcome. It's like, you want to come in for an interview? I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, it's in the big city, paying $40,000 a year. Like life is good. And honestly, so I get ready for the interview. And again, this is where stuff just kind of works out. And I'm like legitimately sick, like actually full on like sick. And I'm, trying to med myself up, like trying to get on the mend. And I remember emailing and being like who calls in sick to an interview? Like they
Mm.
probably have 100 other applicants. And like, I screwed this up. Like, I'm like, thank you for the opportunity. I know what this looks like. And I guess at the time, they're desperate for, programmatic traffickers because they didn't exist. Like, no, 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 we'll reschedule. We'll reschedule. So yeah, I mean, get brought back in, and to be honest, don't even do well on that interview. Get brought back in again. And funny enough, that's where I met one of my very good buddies, Ben Bookbinder. He works at Perion right now. It's he was the one. Everyone was like, yeah, maybe not overly sure about this Wade guy. And Ben's like, yeah, he seems like a cool bro. Why don't we give him a shot? And that's literally how I got in. And from there it's interesting, right? So you go in, I'm so excited, but I had no idea what programmatic advertising. At that time in 2013, no one did, right? And so me, Ben, and this guy Drew were some of the first programmatic traffickers, or people that are setting up the campaigns in all of Canada. So I remember telling my mom, so excited, going to the big city, not realizing that you kind of go, and this is very much startup. Like I'm employee number like 8 or 9, and you kind of get in and it's this, and here's your desk. It's like a wooden fold out desk with a couple crappy tall desktop computers. I'm like, oh no, what have I done? And then you get thrown all these terms like CPM and pixeling and retargeting. I'm like, what the heck are you guys talking about? Like, I almost quit. I think after the second week because I felt useless. Right? I'm like, I can't even help because I had no idea what even I'm looking at. And that was kind of the first foray. And I kind of stuck through it, and at some point, just like the second shoe drops, and it all starts to click, right? And it was fortunate enough that that was a company at the time that was the first one ever to do meta DSP, right? Because
Mm.
back in the day, only certain DSPs were only good at certain things, so we kind of did, well, let's onboard all of them and get the best from each. And so they were really at the frontier of and leader of programmatic advertising at the time, and really taught me how to test and learn, how to build on that and not just deliver, but actually provide action and value for your client.
You mentioned there was a certain point that it just clicked and everything changed for you. Do you remember that moment?
I do. I do. It was, I don't know, it's the way, it's just something that, it's one of those things I tell people now, it usually takes about 4 months to really kind of get in. And
Yeah.
it was this, it was this, it sounds dumb, but I read this quote in like Strategy Magazine or something. It was like, programmatic advertising allows you not to have a fixed view on who your audience is. And I don't know why, like, because that was the reason why it just stuck with me. Is like, okay, so there doesn't need to be a precise science to this, right? It doesn't need to be zeros and ones. There actually is some variability to it. Like, it's going to go up, down, left, right. And I think it was at that point, I'm like, well, everything doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to work. Right. And I
Mm.
think that is for me in my brain, it still sticks with me to this day in terms of, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to work. And that's where the kind of that test and learn. And once I started having that in my mindset, everything just started to click.
And you had a series of promotions there. You started off as an ad op specialist, you moved into programmatic trader, and then you were promoted to head trader. So what were you doing at that point compared to the previous two roles you had at the Exchange Lab?
Yeah, I think you're saying from like the head trader roll down.
Yeah, from the
I
head
think,
trader
yeah.
role, like,
So
how did that like, I understand you're probably rolling up your sleeves a little bit more the further
yeah.
down you are, but when you're head trader now, it sounds like you're the Yoda of the Exchange Lab.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it is. Yeah, it sounds like that.
Well, and I think it's, you go from, and what I loved about that time as well was everything was test and learn. And I think, once you get to a point, but that was test and learn from a micro standpoint. Now as a head trader, you got to implement new strategies from a macro, right? In terms of what DSPs are we onboarding? What DMPs are we onboarding? How do we, what is the best practices for onboarding, different different like intricacies of that, so you can now showcase to your team in terms of where we need to go. But then also now you're taking it to big clients, right? So one of the big ones, for instance, like JetBlue was a massive win for us when we were there, and it's taking that client and not just delivering. Okay, the trader's going to deliver the CPA and do that bit, but how do we take us to the next level, right? How do we turn a CPA into actually butts on seats in a plane, right? And like actually try to visualize the connections with different data and different onboarding of tech. So really trying to push that needle forward and really just trying to provide value for those clients, as well as road mapping, what those next products are going to be that the Exchange Lab's going to focus on.
And then from there, you moved into their director of strategy and marketplace solutions. So as you get
Yeah.
into this new role, what are you doing more of? What are you doing less of? And are you managing people now?
So with the head trainer, I was managing a lot of people. With this one, actually, I was just kind of a little solo artist on the bit.
Oh,
It
really? Okay.
was, yeah. And the reason being, and again, this is a role I kind of created for myself. Um, was before SPO really was a thing and existed. Back then a lot of what we were running on. PMPs weren't really much of a thing. They were just kind of coming out of the woodwork, just starting. So vast majority of what you ran was really open exchange and RTB, right? So what I started noticing was patterns is that, okay, well, we run a lot of the tail aggregate, which, not to bore you with it, but like you're not really sure where you're running. You have no idea where this is. So you have all these sites that you can see that are performing really well, and you're spending money on them. So why
Mm.
don't we take that out of what we know what's working, let the RTB find new sites. And so what I was doing is removing all these sites from New York Times to whatever, and basically cold calling all these different publishers and saying, can we get a deal in place based on X amount of spend, because we're seeing really great performance in that, right? So, and just kind of moving up the funnel and kind of implementing it into this and creating, the first ever kind of marketplace solution and marketplace that is based on performance for the Exchange Lab. It was kind of one of my favorite roles I've now kind of developed and kind of taken on in different aspects and at different companies.
Okay, so you said that you created this role for yourself. Did you have to go in and talk to your boss and say, "Look, there's a gap in our business, and I think
Yeah.
I can fill it, but you've got to move me into this position"? Like, did you find
Yeah.
yourself okay, so that's what did you even, like, draft your job description and everything?
Yeah. So I said, hey, I said, here's an opportunity. It's like we're for all these every and I basically what I had to do is more also test and learn, right? Basically over 6 months showcasing that this proof of concept was working. Hey, if we shifted up here like to this marketplace solution, we're seeing 20% lower CPAs, 20% more conversions. And here's a consistent trend. Here's how we can make money off it. Here's how we can get better performance. And this is why it's needed. And this is really the future of programmatic advertising, at least in my eyes. But yeah, you have to come up with a proof of concept, not just meet me and like, yeah, let's go for it. Um, and that's kind of where it was, right? Because, and I think we'll get into it in a bit, but that's where what I love about this industry as well is that you can really kind of there's so much data to play with and so much opportunity that you can really carve something out as long as there's value to it, right? And that's kind of was the first time, which would be foreshadowing my the rest of my kind of career, that like understanding that as long as you can find that opportunity and it has value to it, you can run with it.
When you started managing people, was it harder for you to kind of let go with what you were your original responsibilities? Like some people, I don't want to say it's a struggle, but sometimes people take time to adapt to being a coach versus being a player because they still like having their hands on keyboard, pulling the levers, and doing all the stuff they were originally doing.
Completely, completely. So I think for me the hardest lessons, I was managing people at a pretty young age at like 26, 27, and I thought everyone was on the same page as me, right? Or everyone just wanted to work hard and make money and do cool shit.
Mm. Yeah,
And I can tell you that is not the case.
that's very
I think
true.
that was the hardest thing I learned, is that is you have to, with managing people, you have to, how do you get the most out of that person, not the most out of what you want. They
That's
both,
a
if
great
you get
line.
right? And I think that's kind of the way I always saw it. Because again, if you can get that person to, what their at least 100% can be and their potential can be, it will align to get to where the company needs to go. But if you look at the other way around, you're telling a fish to climb a tree, like it's not going to work, right? And I think that was the hardest lesson for me. I didn't mind getting off the ones and twos, so the hands on keyboard, if you will. But so that part wasn't as hard for me. But I think letting go of the reins a little bit and being like, okay, you got this. Yeah, it was a bit challenging, but I had great mentors that, before, I exchanged that trusted me to do that as well. And like, you have to let go of some things in order to evaluate others.
And Exchange Lab was acquired by Group M, and it was at this
Correct.
point, if I've got it right, where you started looking things started to change at the job under new management, and you started to look elsewhere, and that's how MIQ presented itself.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So it went from, again, we were super excited. I mean, that was always thing of a startup, right? It's you either run till the lights go off, or you eventually get acquired. So yeah, we got bought by Group M, I want to say in 2015, 16, something like that. And it was exciting for kind of the first year, but then, and like with any acquisition, there's always an earnout, right? Or not always, but a lot of the time. So we stopped focusing on the innovation and just started running just on the delivery, which is fair. Everyone wants to get paid, but like for my mentality, it just wasn't fun anymore. It just wasn't
Mm.
the same. It's just delivery, delivery, delivery. Like nothing new, no new products, no nothing. We just got to kind of run through it. So that was, I think, for me, a bit challenging. And also, I wanted to experience something new, and so my friend recommended me to Alf and Jay over at MIQ, and we actually chatted. I chatted for a little bit, and then I kind of pushed him off for almost a year, and then we kind of came back to the drawing board on a whole new division that would help kind of build out there with the kind of whole new kind of strategy vision over there.
And what was it like, at MIQ compared to your time at, say, the Exchange Lab? Because you were a senior strategy director, if I got
Yep,
that right. Yeah.
yeah, it was. It was good. I think it was a bit of breath of fresh air. It kind of felt like, a bit of the older days of Exchange Lab, but a bit more, like they're a bit bigger, a bit more established, just in terms of like the size of them. I think some of the revenue at the time. And it was great. It was refreshing. I think with anything though, it was the first time I've ever had to deal with, because I grew at the exchange lab and became more senior at the exchange lab. But it was the first time going to a company at a averagely senior level, but being the new kid on the block. So everyone's like, "Who the
Mm.
hell is this guy? And why is he more senior than me? Why didn't I get this job? Why didn't I have this opportunity?" So you have to, you're trying to prove yourself, right? And I think that was the first time I've ever had to do that without, with no one knowing me, right? No one know who I was, and this guy coming in and asking things and coming up with new strategies, and so that was a bit of an art to get around. But at the end of the day, I think that's the quote unquote hazing. I wouldn't say hazing, but they have any new job until you start kind of landing some revenue and some new strides that people are like, okay, actually, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's good for our business.
So would you say that was the turning point there, where
Yeah.
once you started bringing money in, people fell in line behind you? I don't wanna make it seem like that, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, yeah.
It's like you said,
I
it
think
adds
it's
credibility
more.
to it.
I think it's more because yeah, and I think it's more because I'm coming up with new concepts and new ideas and new ways of doing things. It's almost like, well, why don't we do things the way we were kind of doing it? And I think once we kind of aligned on, okay, well, actually, the clients are liking this, that we're kind of bringing it in, and there's some revenue coming in the door and driving that. I think, yeah, that's kind of the other shoe that dropped. I think for them for sure.
What was the attraction to joining Finecast? Because this was your first VP role.
Yeah. So I mean, the attraction was like my biggest mentor, Virla, from the days at Exchange Lab. She stayed with Exchange Lab as it migrated over to Group M. And in that time, she was tasked to start Finecast out here in Canada. And because it was already in the UK and Australia at that time, so we're going to be the third market to launch it globally. And she was tasked with that, and so yeah, she kind of came to me with like, "Hey, do you want to build out, the addressable TV and CTV ecosystem in Canada? Do some pretty badass stuff." And what we used to work just so well together at Exchange Lab in terms of just whiteboarding stuff and coming up with new ideas, and we really just fed really well off each other. In terms of creating like amazing solutions, and that at that time at Exchange Lab, that was like the most fun I've ever had. And I kind of wanted that again, right? And I wanted a new challenge. And so, yeah, I came over, and again, same thing, right? It was a massive task ahead of us, and it took a while to get there, but it was a ton of fun, obviously working with her again. And, I always knew that, connected TV was going to be that next frontier. And I think at a smaller company at the time, we wouldn't have been able to have the seat at the table that we did with, say, Group M with Rogers and Bell and
Mm.
and what have you. Um, because again, CTV wasn't really valued. So, for us to go in, even at say at that time, say with an MIQ or Exchange Lab, they might have been like, yeah, we're not going to put that much effort into it. But when you come with the larger cloud, I guess, of a Group M at the time, they'll listen and be like, hey, there actually is some value in this connected TV thing and these different integrations, and we'll put a bit more time into it to help you guys build up this product.
Did she have to work hard at selling you to come back to a Group M, company? Just because, I mean, you obviously left on good terms, but like you said, professionally, it wasn't going in the direction you wanted it to go. So when you got that phone call or that email to take a second crack at it, did you really have to take a step back and think about if this was the right move for your career?
Yeah, I did. I knew there was going to I definitely took a step back because again, I always again, this is not to poo-poo on any agency or anything. I just never really wanted to work at an agency in full transparency, right? Like I didn't because I didn't really understand it as well, right? I think I always wanted to kind of be a bit more of that kind of startup area, that kind of digital side. I didn't really because I only really saw agencies as just like the planning component and that kind of activation, which didn't really interest me. So I was like, yeah, I don't really know if I ever wanted to work at an agency. And I think what the benefit was this is that you got to be entrepreneurial in that sense and creating something new but having the back of a of a bigger brother called Group M, you know what I mean? And just being able to kind of do. And I think what they did really well is that they kind of, they left us alone to some capacity, right? I think in the early days that like you guys kind of build, will support you wherever you need, and we can drive from there. But there was for sure some selling to myself. But I knew that this is the I wanted to be the sole like one of the top experts in CTV in Canada and get ahead of it before the landscape kind of caught up. And I think I was able to somewhat achieve that.
And how did your role change when you were promoted to SVP of strategy and partnerships?
Um, yeah, I mean that one was when Virla left, I again it was she was kind of the boss at the time. So it was uh more I guess managerial options, not just hey me going out and building out this tech. Now it's running the team and building out that component. So a bit more I guess responsibility in that sense and revenue responsibility and managing up, which I'm not the best at, but yeah, I
That
think it
can
was
be a
more
difficult
just
thing to do. Like,
for
don't
sure
get
it
me
is.
wrong. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on managing upwards.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, 100%. But it was, it's just more managerial stuff, right? More action, but also, we were also doing a lot better at the time, right? So we were finally starting to make some really big inroads with revenue, really big inroads with clients. So now it's not just, hey, we'll throw a fine cast on plan. Now we're having more strategic conversations with clients at that point and more like, hey, CTV should be at the forefront of some of your plans, not just kind of a toss in for an IO here and there.
And when was her name Vila? Have I got it right?
You're like, yeah,
When she left the company, because she had brought you on board, and you even mentioned that she was a mentor of yours back at the Exchange Lab. When she left Finecast, did you take a step back and kind of take stock of whether or not you wanted to continue with the company? And let me preface that I've
yeah,
had the opportunities to join new companies because someone's brought me over,
yeah,
and then they leave a couple months later, and it's like, okay, was I here because of them? Was I their person? Or have I
yeah.
carved out enough of a niche for myself where I've got my sort of own identity and brand within the company?
Yeah, I think it was so I saw it as actually I saw it as as an opportunity, right? So she went on pat leave for a bit and for like a year and a bit, and so I saw it as an opportunity. Me and this girl Stacy were kind of taking over the reins at the time, and so I saw it as a growth opportunity. In all honesty, right, where it's you don't have your you don't have your person there anymore. Now you get thrown out, you get thrown out of your comfort zone again,
Mm.
right? And really trying to understand again. So we're going back to Dow and going back to Exchange Lab and go back to MIQ. Every single one of those times I grew by getting out of your comfort zone, by not having that sounding board of, you're going in the meetings and, someone asked a pretty important question, they would look at V first, right? Obviously, she's running the company. Where now as that person isn't there. So, oh yeah, now it's me. I have to answer this challenging question. I have to answer this question. And you get nervous at the start, but you start to realize how much you actually unlock and know when you don't have that safety net
That's
anymore.
a
Because you
very good
have
way of putting it, yeah. That's when things
because you
click for
have to.
me.
Yeah. Right. So you have to. So I definitely took stock in that. And again, like I said, like I had Stacy and some others there that, I wasn't on my own in any capacity, but it was definitely a different aspect, an aspect to it for sure.
So Finecast not moves, it morphs into Group M Nexus.
Yeah.
Does much change the company with that branding, or is that just a new label?
Uh Yeah, it was. I mean, a lot changed. um, it was. I mean, what I yeah, I think at the time, what we wanted to do was, you know, and I 100% get the move, right? We wanted to consolidate. We had Finecast buying TV, it's Access buying programmatic, Connect buying at home. And again, you're telling 5 different stories kind of around the same viewer. So they did, strategic move. How do we bring that all into one buying platform? So it's one area to go to. Um, Clients basically trying to simplify uh, that entire process and that entire flow. And I think in theory, they made some progress and stuff now, but I think at the time it looked great on a PowerPoint and on paper. It was really challenging, especially for people at say at my level, to actually make that happen because there's so many
Mm.
moving pieces and so many moving parts, and you have years and years and years of ways of doing things. I think it's not even just the mechanics; it's also hearts and minds and training. And for me, I'll just speak for myself. It was definitely a challenging period for sure, because even just for me the transition. Um, you go from being specialized in connected TV and going back to my roots in programmatic, which I'm good at, but now onboarding different people and onboarding different tech, it was definitely even just for myself, it was definitely a challenging time and a challenging thing to kind of switch over.
At pretty much every job you've had, you've managed to secure at least one or two forms of promotion. So if anyone listening or watching to this is trying to go for that next level, get a job or promotion at their current company, and they came to you for advice, Wade, what would you say to them?
I would say honestly, I would say always like test, learn, screw up, figure it out.
Mm.
Right. I think it's like we have like hard work is one thing, right? It's all and unfortunately it doesn't always get recognized, right? Is that especially at larger companies, like people, people expect the work to be done. And unfortunately, especially now, it's getting further removed from actually understanding that what the kind of hard work aspect is. But I think we're in such a great industry in the sense where there's no limit to test it. There's no limit. There's no box you can be put in. I think a lot of times people think, well, I'm only doing this for my job description, but there's so many different data points, so many different companies, so many different aspects that you can really carve out your own niche and showcase it. And the only way you can do that is by testing and learn and not being afraid to fail. Because like, at the end of the day, like there's so many different aspects, and if you can showcase that test and learn is providing value and providing outcomes and raising all tides and raising all ships, it does get recognized, right? And you also, and even if it doesn't, you've learned, right? You've learned, you've developed, you've now become that expert that hey, that next move is going to be that much better.
Okay, so let's bring things full circle then. Avivi, where did the idea come from? Like, do you remember that moment when you said, okay, I've got an idea, I don't want to move forward with it? And were you moving forward with the baby steps on the side, or was it something that you just went all into?
Yeah, it's something that I've always kind of I've thought about for like a long time now, right? And just in terms of maybe not exactly just the video side of things, is that when working, you know what I was kind of always thinking about was like why like the fact that we still plan kind of bottoms up to me was always a such a archaic archaic way of thinking things, right? If you have $100 to spend, why are we just pre-setting, well, CTV only gets this, digital only gets this, online
Mm.
video only gets this? Because yeah, you get that. You have your planning tools, you can do that, but it means you're having a preconceived notion on who your audience is. You have a preconceived notion of where your spend is, and actually maybe CTV needed $40, maybe it needed 10, and not actually understanding like how it all kind of comes together. And all of a sudden you're planning like that, and now you're having 4 different conversations around the same audience. Well, this is what we did in connected TV. Well, this is what we did in digital. Like there has to be a more simplistic and better way to do it, right? And I think the other side of it is, if I go back to that quote I said earlier, where it's, where always stuck in my head, where I said programmatic allows you not to have a fixed view on who your audience is. That is the same logic I'm applying to Avvivi. It's like, why are we having such a fixed view? And I think the more and more we get fragmented and further away from what we're trying to do, we start to lose that plot. right? We're like, hey, we're delivered, we got completion rate, we did this, but okay, well, did it drive value for the client? What was the audience experience? And was there wastage? Like, how do you know when you ran an online video or connected TV if you hit that same user if you're running with three or four different areas? Right. So there
Mm.
had to be a better way, especially for clients, is that, we do a really good job, and I'm guilty of it as well, is that we do a really good job of explaining to clients why it worked with media metrics that actually showcasing did it actually have impact. And that's really for me, kind of going back to the grassroots of why we're doing this, right? Is to drive value and create a good user experience. And there has to be a better way. And that's really where kind of the foundation of what we're trying to do really kicked off.
I want to talk more about the foundation of the company. So I've had a lot of entrepreneurs on the podcast, many of them, and it seems like almost all of them go in the same direction. They're saving money on the side, they're talking to their spouse or their partner about, hey, we're going to go in and we're going to do this, and they're starting to build it from the ground up. But you noted in our pre-production work that you guys have investors. So I
Yeah.
have to imagine then that this was probably your first time putting together an investor pitch. And was that you getting out of your comfort zone for that, trying to attract that investment and get other people to buy in literally financially into your idea and your vision?
So, yeah, so there's part of that, but where it kind of started, in all honesty, was so the investors are, the Minicucci Media Group, which is the owners of, UB, UBTV. They've made a lot of really great acquisitions, a really great Canadian company that's been around for almost 20 plus years. Right. And I know, the CEO very well, Michael, and the CTO very well, Anthony. And to be honest, like when I had some time off, we are kind of like, just kinda kicking the bucket in terms of, okay, where's that next area that we can go to? How do we maximize what we have at UBTV? But what's this industry kind of missing? I think that's kind of where we almost almost cocktail napkin esque, if you will. Like not to that aspect, literally over a couple of beers and hanging out, being like, okay, let's try this out. How do we change and get back to that kind of organic bit? And where's the actual true value behind it? And to be honest, that's kind of where it came. Then yeah, I think there was more of a vision around the investor deck in terms of where this can grow, who we're going to go after, what's your 12, 24, 36-month kind of plan. Because obviously, there's other investors in it as well. But from day one, they're believers, and they're also not just. I would say they're not just partners from an investor standpoint. They're very much partners in terms of making this work and hands on with me on this journey as well.
All right, Wade. So if anyone is listening or watching to this and they want to get in touch to learn more about Avivi, what's the best way they can do it?
You can go to avvivi.com, avvivi.com. You can reach out to me at wade@avvivi.com. And to be honest, you're going to see a lot of PR over the next couple of weeks. We got a lot of more exciting announcements, a lot of new hires coming on board. We're ready to change things up and make some noise.
All right. Well, look, all the best to you with that. And we've put both your email and the URL at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to bring it home now with rapid fire questions. You ready?
Good, let's go.
Okay. The campaign you were most proud of.
JetBlue out of Exchange Lab. It was life changing, goal changing, and really pushed forward the programmatic promise.
Your favorite movie.
Interstellar.
I could not follow that movie at all. I was pouring over the Wikipedia page for like days after trying to
Oh, you,
piece
you
it
got to
together.
watch it about 20 times like I have. So,
Okay. All right. So if Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
I think someone subtle, like Bradley Cooper or something along those lines. Not too stardom.
All
Something
right.
along those lines.
And if Hollywood were to make this movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
Well, what's eating Gilbert Grape was already taken, so
Oh
I think
God. Okay.
Land the Plane Way, maybe something like that.
I like that. All right. Your favorite book.
Uh, I think on one side, I like Freakonomics and anything written by Dutner or Malcolm Gladwell. On the other side of things, I really, really like Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. I know it's a weird thing, but I just
No,
like
it's a
some.
good book. I've read
It's a
that
really,
too.
I always like read it in his voice too.
Yes, you can't not do
You
that.
cannot not read it in his voice, but there's some really good lessons. Again, my favorite quote from that sticks with me is less impressed, more involved. And
Mm.
again, that's something that, even with the VV, that's kind of what we're trying to do here.
And also too, that whole chapter dedicated to him wanting to get out of that sort of romantic comedy typecast
Yeah,
that he'd been stuck with, and a lot of people don't
I think
realize
it's
he was
brilliant.
like, I think he was like unemployed for 13 months at that point, and
Yeah, because he wouldn't take these roles. It's
yeah, and his
crazy.
management team was losing their mind because they couldn't get commission off of we can't get
Yeah,
commission off of nothing.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Okay, your favorite song?
Country Roads, John Denver.
You know where that comes up in my mind already? Geez, it was the last Kingsman movie.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
It plays
so
a
good.
big
Yeah,
part in
yeah.
that movie, and I've got it
Yeah, yeah.
aca if you go onto Spotify, you can find an a cappella version with Mark Strong singing it.
So when I did a boxing match like 10 years ago. That was my walkout song. It was
Was it
great.
Agency Wars?
It was Agency Wars, yeah.
Agency Wars, yes,
Yeah.
nice. Okay, if you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would you say?
Be yourself. Be yourself. It works out in the end, I think.
And my signature closing question, if you weren't in media and ad tech, what would you be doing and why?
I'd be owning the Tim Hortons in Rockwood, Ontario, which is still my goal long term down the line. Just going back to my country, small town roots and having a bit more of a simplistic life.
And we're gonna end things right here. Wade, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Awesome, Victor. Really appreciate it, buddy.